So once again, welcome to our March office hours. And Helen and I have a couple of things to share. And then, of course, as always, we'll open it up for additional questions.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear me. Today's topics are data from interventions in ETR, background info in the summary, part 2 of ETR, writing grade level in a goal, writing goals that are grade and age appropriate, excusal from end of course exam when student uses an alternative pathway or competency, alternate assessment, and graduating with diploma, not by regular means, or and what that means in the state and federal.
Okay, so we're going to start off with some of the questions that we've had about ETR. What exactly should be put in the ETR for data from interventions? I know this can be confusing because when we think of interventions, we think of obviously the service delivery and what we do for students in terms of their IEP. But for the purpose of an ETR, what we're actually talking about is were there interventions provided prior to the student's referral and identification? So that would be, were they going through the RTI process or MTSS, or if the student was already identified and already has an IEP, were there additional interventions or supports above and beyond what is included in the IEP? I will tell you that that is extremely rare. Very, very seldom do we see that. So generally speaking, that's going to be a no. So let me go ahead there. Okay, so then that leads to the question, what should we mark on the planning form? So if there were no interventions above and beyond what's in the IEP and it's a review ETR, then you should mark NA on the planning form. And I didn't put this language in here because we've said it so much, but just a reminder, then in part 2, you have to make a statement where it asks about interventions for an initial or a reeval. You simply have to say, no additional interventions above and beyond the IEP were provided as the team has determined that the IEP is suitable to meet the student's needs or the student is making adequate progress. So you just have to make a statement in the part 2, and you should be marking NA on the planning form. If it is an initial ETR and there were interventions as part of the RTI process, MTSS, then you're going to mark either sufficient data or new information needed if if it was still ongoing. Okay, another question that has come up, and I've seen this in some of the ETRs, and just got clarification from the Office of Exceptional Children to make sure that we were all on the same page, and they did confirm what the expectation is. So I just want to share that with you as well. If you are including progress from the student's current IEP in a part 1. So if you're a classroom teacher or someone else who would be completing a part 1 and you're putting progress notes, you're including some of that, that should be marked on the planning form as classroom-based assessments and progress toward the general curriculum. Do not mark data from interventions, because as I already started with, that is not what we mean in an ETR when we talk about data from interventions. And I've just walked through what that actually means. So it should be marked as classroom-based assessments, progress toward the gen ed curriculum. And then within the part 1, if you've not heard us say this before, we repeat this every time we do internal monitoring training. We strongly urge you to use bold headings within all the sections of an ETR and use the exact same language that is on the planning form. That way it's a very clear one-to-one match. And when someone is looking at it, they can also look at a part 1 And then they can easily go into the part two, find the same heading with the same language and see that it was carried over into the summary in the part two. So use a heading that just reads progress from the IEP. Okay, and then finally, the last thing for an ETR is we've had the question a few times in the part two summary, where should the background information go? Because there's a section that specifically addresses parent info, but there isn't a section that specifically says background information. And this is pretty easy. Just put it in the summary with the other information from the school psych. Generally, that's going to be under summary of assessments results, and that's where the psych is going to capture, all of that other information. Just use a heading that says background information and pop it in there. That's fine.
Okay, what is the rule about writing grade level in the goal? One of the examples would, given grade level math equations, the student will. And it says, do you have to state grade level? Well, I know there's been confusion about this because in the past, we were told during some of our former IDA reviews that you did have to write the grade level. If you say something like just given literary text, the student will, given a reading passage, the student will, it is assumed that the material at the student's current grade level that's the grade level they're in. So, and I think in the past, we had some monitors that used to say you can't make any assumptions on an IEP, but this is okay if written this way, because on the IEP, it's going to say if the kid's in 5th grade, the kid's in 9th grade, the kid's in 12th grade. So not assuming, basically we're saying this is what the grade level is. So you don't have to put in, given a 12th grade literary text, the student will. So that has come up a little bit. We are in an IDA review right now with people. So it has come up because, like I said, I think formally, or it's been probably a number of years. And once again, we do say to people, when people say, when did that happen? If you don't keep up with IEPs and ETRs, we even found out this year there were some changes. So we try to put those into our internal monitoring, training, and into any of our Canvas courses. Okay, but if you write grade level text, for example, or grade level multi-step math problems, you must state which grade level. So you're basically saying the word grade level. Previously, you'd be saying given literary text, the student will. I'm going to pause because I also know, I don't know if we said, and there might be a couple new people on here, you can unmute and ask a question. You can put something in the chat, and we'll definitely, open it up for questions at the end. But this can be a little bit confusing. And we have kind of probably with our internal monitoring have steered people to say, given literary text or given a reading passage. Just to kind of not have to put in that necessary grade level.
Okay, so thank you for that, Helen. And that kind of leads us into the next thing we wanted to talk about. We've heard a lot of debate in the region, and we know that even, there might be folks in the legal realm, attorneys, or some folks in districts who are saying different things. And we understand that. So again, after having a follow-up conversation with OEC, we feel very confident that what we have said and what we continue to say is accurate. And so we're just sharing this. If someone in your district tells you to do something different, then that's their choice. We're not dictating, we are telling you what the expectation is. So there's a lot of debate about if you can write goals for students that are 5 grade levels below what the student's current grade level is, or restricting, when you think about that, you have to ask yourself, is that across the board? Is it that for one specific goal? Because when you start restricting access to the general ed curriculum and you are working on content that is not grade level, you have modified the curriculum. So I guess the short, easy answer is, if we see a goal for a student that is in 7th grade, and there's a goal that says they're going to be reading with 2nd grade level text, and we see that in other areas as well, and it's not targeting decoding or fluency, that's a different story. Decoding and fluency, you have to work with material that's at their reading level in order to be able to do that. But what we often see is people apply that logic across the board to everything. A student does not have to be able to read at a 10th grade level to understand 10th grade content. You don't have to be able to read at all. If you listen to a book on tape, you can still understand the concepts. You can still identify the themes of the story or the characters or the plot development, all of those things. Being the readability, not being able to read the words on the page, does not affect, I shouldn't say it doesn't affect, but it doesn't prohibit a student from being able to comprehend. They're two different things. And so you can't apply that logic across the board or apply that to, to math. Here's another example that, sometimes we'll hear people say, well, the student hasn't mastered the 4 basic functions. So they're not, they don't have mastery of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And those are fundamental skills, foundational skills. So you can't move on. That's not true. You can move on. Those skills carry over into higher level math and are used forever in everything they do. And you can write goals that are still working in grade level content, but still targeting those skills. So you could write a goal that the student will use the 4 basic functions or will correctly multiply and divide within algebra and geometry problems. So still high school appropriate, still grade level content, but you're still targeting those missing lower level skills. The other thing we wanted to stress is that we don't often take time to talk about, like during internal monitoring or some of those things, is students develop splinter skills. And this is widely known. There's a ton of research around this, that just because you missed or don't have some of the fundamental skills does not mean that students can't still acquire some of the higher level skills. So it is a disservice to the student to say, no, we can't move on until the student masters X, Y, and Z, because they won't be able to do that. That's not true. For some students, that might be true, but you should not make those assumptions. You have to presume competence, and you have to make sure that you're providing access to grade level content. And the biggest reason why that is so critical is, for example, if we have a student who is in 10th grade and there's some of the 9th grade skills, fundamental skills that the student is missing. So we just start working on the 9th grade stuff and we stop giving the student the 10th grade content and access to the 10th grade materials and 10th grade, learning standards. All we've done is make the gap grow, because now you're supplanting what they should be doing in 10th grade with 9th grade stuff. So they're never going to close the achievement gap. They're never going to catch up if we continue to do that. What we need to do is provide that grade level content. And then in addition to that, we provide supports and instruction in some of those missing skills. And like we said, you can still target some of those missing skills, those deficits that students have. You should be targeting those within grade level content. And then finally, the last thing that I'm going to say about that, and I'll let Helen share, is if you are writing goals that are way below grade level and the student is not accessing that grade level content, then that wouldn't be a red flag if it was explained in the profile that the student's on a modified curriculum and the student's working from the on alternate assessment, or they're working from the extended standards and learning progressions, even if they're not on alternate assessment. If that's explained in the profile, and then in section 7, we expect under modifications to see a description of the modified curriculum in one or more content areas. The only other thing that is critical to remember, particularly once our students are secondary level age, so once they're in middle school and high school, you have to make sure that if you are modifying the curriculum for a student, that the student and the family understand the long-term ramifications of that. We're not saying that you can't do it, you can, but it absolutely is going to impact and probably to some degree or to a large degree impede the student's ability to access and pass end of course exams, which can also impact their graduation pathway. So we're not saying that it's never appropriate to modify a student's curriculum, but we're saying that when you do that, you have to make sure that everybody on the team understands what the implications are for that student's long-term outcomes when you modify the curriculum. Helen, anything you wanted to add?
No, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was just going to talk about the alternate assessment and, like you said, using the progressions, and naturally if kids on a extended standards, you're using those, and those are aligned with where the student should be or what they're working on. They're aligned as far as, you know, grade level, but they're much more appropriate for someone that is on extended standards. So, and like Dee Dee had said, using the progressions as a entry point also is very important. And then being transition person, yes, just making sure when you are looking at that transition section and you're talking about a kid on extended standard, and not that they don't deserve to be on extended standards. I think we've made tremendous gains in that area with our crosswalk, but people need to understand. I know people, I'm getting on my transition kick now, but if a student is on extended standards, there are certainly things that they're going to be able to do post-secondary, but families need to know, even with like modified, like Dee Dee said, they won't be prepared typically for end of course, but also it could impact where they would go in post-secondary outcomes as far as, you know, graduation. And I do know there are specific colleges that have programs for students with low incidence or students with intellectual disabilities. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about if you've got a kid on extended standards and their transition goal is to be a veterinarian. No. Could they do something in that area? Yes. Now I will be quiet because I get too caught up in transition.
No, those are all great reminders, Helen. And that's again why we want to stress the importance of not removing access to grade level content just because students may have some significant deficits in those fundamental skills. Work on them, but always, always work on them within grade level content. It's different when we're talking about a modified curriculum or students who are alternately assessed. That's a whole different thing. But when we're talking about students who are not alternately assessed and they are not receiving a modified curriculum across the board, you have to proceed with caution and be very careful and intentional about how you do that. So hopefully that clears a little bit of that up.
Yeah, and we'll pause for just a second here if somebody needs to, I don't think we have anything in the chat, and or if somebody wants to unmute and ask a question. Okay, not hearing anything. Okay, we often get this question, when a student has tested multiple times and can't pass end of course exam, but has met the score requirements on web exams and through the Ohio Means Jobs to earn a diploma through that pathway, should we mark them excused from the consequences? And that means, are you going to excuse them from the consequences of the end of course exam? No, because they've met, and that's through other alternative pathways or competencies too. There are others that are out there, so you, and I know some people in the past, because I've received calls that have marked kids excused from end of course, but then they've met an alternative pathway and they said, should I go back and amend that? Definitely, because that's going to show up in your EMIS and in your graduation that no, they didn't meet graduation requirements. If they're doing an alternative pathway, then, and they meet that competency requirement for graduation, then there is no need for excusal. And that plays a big role in your graduation
Data.
thank you, Dee, graduation data. So if there's any questions about that, like I said, some people are really just getting to know some of the alternative competencies and whatever, but I have received some calls. Okay, they passed these, they earned this, alternative competency. Do I go back and I already excused them? Do I go back and amend that? Definitely yes. And don't excuse them if you haven't already and they've met this. This is this is the same as getting, the requirement as passing end of course.
Perfect. Thank you, Helen.
Okay, when a student is taking the alternate assessment in high school, does it count against the percentage of students with disabilities graduating by regular means? Yes, and how I'm going to explain this is, okay, you can excuse kids from not getting the competency proficiency level alternate assessment, but even if they do, it does impact your graduation by regular means, because the student will still get an Ohio diploma, and I'll explain that, I think, in the next slide. But in and of itself, alternate assessment is only meant for a small group of students. So that does impact your graduation rate, because that assessment is not available to any other student. It is the federal mandate that alternate assessment does not show competency, not competency. It does not show that you've met by a typical pathway. And in Ohio, once again, we only have one diploma. And like I said, there are students that need to be on alternate assessment, and we don't take them off on alternate assessment because of this. But it will impact your students with disabilities. The indicator one graduation for students with disabilities, it will impact that, because alternate assessment is not recognized because it can't be. Only a small group of kids can take it. So it isn't available to any other students. So that's why it will impact your graduation by regular means.
Which is, again, just an area, as Helen said, indicator one in your special education profile. It doesn't mean that there's going to be any negative consequence to that.
No.
It just does reflect in your special education profile. And again, like Helen said, that's not a reason to not let kids be on alternate assessment if they.
And I know
if they
districts are
should.
doing that. I think in the past, when we had kids back maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago that were categorized as SLD or ED or whatever, and they were taking alternate assessment, people didn't realize that. And also, they shouldn't have been taking alternate assessment. So anyhow, yeah, you don't take kids off, but we have had questions like, well, they've passed like the alternate assessment test, they've met the competency, and it's like, yeah, and that's great. But it still counts in the disabilities graduation by regular means. Anybody have anything they want to question about that? Good, we'll move on.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Well, I think that actually is the end of our, the end of what we wanted to present, so.
Well, I had one other thing, because I've had 2 calls from teachers. And I know this was confusing for a while, because when we had the crosswalk, and then when we were doing, graduation and the new, how meeting standards, alternative pathways, for a while, people believed that if a student was excused from the consequences on alternate assessment, they would not get a diploma. As long as they have tested twice, they're excused, and they still earn the 2 seals, which they can have state seal and a local seal. They will get a Ohio diploma. So, like I said, and that gets confusing, and I just had 2 teachers email me this past week, so I wanted just to add that.
Thank you, Helen. That's a really good reminder that, yeah, for graduation, there are 3 buckets that students have to meet. So they have to meet the coursework, and then the competency, which is testing, and then the I forget the name of it now, but the other bucket is about the seals, the preparedness. So yeah, that's a really good reminder that as long as they have met the coursework requirements, they have the number of credits, and like Helen said, they've made their seals, then they still get a diploma, even if they're excused from the just like every other student. Even students with end of course exams who aren't alternately assessed, it's no different. So good reminder, and I'm so glad that you brought up the 1 diploma, because there still seems to be a lot of confusion around that in our state. So that is everything that we have for you. We're gonna just kind of pause for a minute and see if anyone has any questions, and if not, then we will let you go a little bit early this month.
Hi, ladies, it's Erin.
Hi, Erin.
We have a question about plops. In our original training, the plot checklist we got from you guys in our internal monitoring training had on there input from parents. On the new checklist, it doesn't say that. Does that mean we don't need to write that sentence anymore, that the parent agrees with this goal?
No, and that never was like a requirement. That was just some of additional things that you might want to put in a plop. No, there are 3 required components of a plop, and that is that you have the student's current functioning, which is basically a description of their strengths and needs as it relates to the goal, not everything, just as it relates to the goal. And then you have baseline data for the goal, and then you have grade level expectations or same age, same grade comparison. That's all that's required in the plop. There are other things that are helpful sometimes to include in a plop, but no, having parent info, that's really something that you would put in the profile. Yeah. So, and I'm sure that if that was on an older checklist, it probably was just a saying again that, sometimes there's good information that you might want to also include in the plop if it's relevant, and that falls under that category. But no, you don't have to include that. Again, we expect to see that in the profile, or even in the future planning section,
Right.
section 2.
And in the past, several years ago, profiles were, the plot was, there was more information in the plot. That has been streamlined. So like Dee Dee said, you don't talk about everything else in there. And I'm not saying that that's what you're asking, Erin, but in the past, it was kind of that way. So
Yeah.
that's, kind of a,
Yeah.
an old misconcept, or it was a requirement back then, but put all that stuff in the profile, and like Dee Dee said, the 3 components really are all you really need in that plot.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Helen. And we've shared this before, but the reason that there was sort of that
Mhm.
switch there were years there where we were seeing plops that were 2 pages long.
Yes, yes.
And what happens is the reason that's such a problem is not that all that information isn't valuable,
Right,
but it really belongs in the profile, because what happens is when someone is looking at the plop and the goal for compliance, if there's a bunch of extraneous information that's not related to the goal, you end up losing the required 3 components. And so what we found across the state was there was all this really good info about a student, but then they would forget to put the baseline in, or people would forget to put, you know, the current functioning or the same age or comparison grade level expectation. And so that's why we sort of flipped it and said, you've got all this other great information that tells us a lot about the student story, put it in the profile, because we always say that's the big picture. That's the, you know, that's the story about the student, is the profile. And the plop, you really do want it to be more streamlined, because everything that's in the plop we want it to align with the goal, not be a bunch of extraneous information that's helpful and good, but not where we want to see it.
Great, thank you.
welcome.
Okay, well, we don't have anything else in the chat. If there are no other questions, then we're gonna officially sort of sign off and thank everyone. We will stay on for an additional few minutes, as we always do, in case there's something that you would like to talk about, but not have it be recorded. So we want to say thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Please remember, next month is May 8th, and that's also at 9 a.m. And just a reminder of where you can register, you know, on our website, go to professional development and events, and you can register for all of our office hours then. So we hope to see you all then. So thank you.
Yes.